Okay, so lit paper 1 is over and you actually got some decent questions, but now you need to revise for lit paper 2. So for this, I'm going to go through inspector calls, love and relationships poetry, and then a bit of unseen poetry as well. So for section A, it would be on your modern text, and the one that I'm teaching is in inspector calls. So for this, it's basically exactly the same structure as how you write your Macbeth and Jekyll and Hyde essay. With a point, evidence, analysis, and you write 3 paragraphs and a thesis, whatever your teachers really told you to do. Remember, as I say each time, that AQA does not reward you retelling the plot. They do not want to have a summary of the play or a summary of the story. All they want is you to actually analyse it. So you have a conceptual argument in your head. What is it that you actually want to share in terms of the question? So making sure that you link back to the question and you actually analyse methods, language, structure of the play. And remember, stage directions are a method. I think there are like 5 main themes in inspector calls, and if you understand all 5 of them, you can do well with regardless of what the question is. So responsibility, class, gender, the generational divide as in the young versus the old, and capitalism versus socialism. And in a way, all of those actually link as well, and there's multiple quotes that you can use that link to a range of these quotes as well as characters. A big mistake people make is they just start memorizing quotes, or they memorize like a full essay. You can't, well, maybe sometimes you can, but you can't always like apply one essay to any question, and you can't just memorize quotes and not understand them. The best thing to do is memorize quotes, yes, but actually memorize quotes that you understand the methods and analysis of. Don't memorize a quote and just know that that's a metaphor or that's a stage direction. What does a quote actually mean? What was the writer's effects? Why did the writer decide to use that quote in that specific scene? What was the reason? How can we then link it back to whatever the question is? So a good way to plan is knowing what you're going to write at the beginning, the middle, and the end. So understanding a character's change, or understanding how a character doesn't change, how they start, how in the middle and the end, how a theme changes, like social responsibility. Are they responsible at the beginning? Do some of them start gaining a sense of responsibility? Do some of them ever have that responsibility, or even like keep it, like, you know, from the characters? So for example, if we were going to talk about the character of Sheila, we can say that she starts off as childish and immature and materialistic, and then choose quotes that match that. And then the middle, we can talk about how she feels very intense guilt. She feels very guilty for what she's done, and she's self-aware. She knows what she's done is wrong. And then my last paragraph, I can talk about how she continues to take responsibility. She is morally superior to her parents at this stage. She takes charge, she's self-aware, she's a socialist. When Mr. Burling and Mrs. Burling thought that the police inspector was false and fake, she still thought that we have to change. Like, we have a sense of responsibility. We've still done something wrong, even if we're not going to get caught for it. So instantly, having that middle, beginning, and end about a character, it creates structure for you. You understand how a character develops or changes, and you can write about them in better detail. I will be making another video in which I include all relevant quotes, or quotes that I think are the most relevant and that you can then apply to different questions. My actual prediction for an inspector calls, which I've thought for quite a while, is a question on Eric, but I think it will link to responsibility. So I think the question might be, to what extent is Eric Burling seen as a responsible character? And I will do a video on that as well, on how to plan that. I do also think that they could do something about the young versus old generational divide, or social class, if they're doing a thematic question, but I am pretty convinced that it will be on Eric and responsibility as a whole. Don't quote me on this though. I can't be 100%, and my predictions aren't always correct, but that's just what I think. Now, I know a lot of people do power and conflict, but I teach love and relationships poem, so I just want to go through just overall generally the how would you revise for the comparative poetry section. So firstly, don't try and just memorize all 15 poems equally. Don't try and like memorize them in so much detail. It's not really sustainable to memorize them all, especially if you only have this week and you didn't really know the poems before. If you master 4 to 5 poems and understand them in a lot of depth, you should be okay. Like, poem that comes up might not be one that you revise, but as long as you know something about the poem or a couple of quotes from it, you're fine, and then you can just compare it to one that you know in more detail and in a lot of depth. So have a deep understanding of 5, and then just know what the others are about and what simple quotes that you could use to analyse. There's only like very certain themes that can come up for this, and I think there'd just be things like the power of love, or like conflict in relationships, possibly to do with like loss or memories, identity, basically just love and family are the main things. So for the poems that you're trying to memorize in depth, know about 5 or 6 quotes from them and know the structure of the poem. So what is a rhyme scheme like? Are there short or long sentences? Is there enjambment? Is there caesura? Like, think of specific structural features that your poem might have just to bump your grade up. So your comparison, it's not just about like spotting similarities between the two poems. It's thinking about the intentions of the writer and then linking it back to the question. So if the question's on love, how can you compare, for example, Sonnet 29 and When We Two Parted? What types of love are there? Obviously, there will be differences between the poems, but you don't just talk about differences. You would have to talk about similarity as well as a difference. What I would do is I would do a massive paragraph, 2 large paragraphs with a lot of analysis and a lot of detail on both poems. And in at least once in both of those paragraphs, talk about the structural feature of your poems. For a point, you would just have to do like a slight sort of difference. So rather than saying things like both poems show love, you could do like, whilst poem A presents love as obsessive and controlling, poem B presents relationships as fragile, yet still capable of reconciliation. So they're both about love, but in different forms or in different ways. I think the scariest part of the poetry section is just the fact that people feel that they have to memorize all the poems. If you do know all your poems in at least some detail, there shouldn't be much to worry about. As long as you know a few poems in very high detail, that way you can use those to compare to any poem that you are given. And at least you are given one poem as well, so you don't need to memorize quotes from that. They will be there in front of you. You just need to have some sort of understanding of them. So I would structure it like, for each paragraph, a comparative point, and then I would analyze all of poem A. So evidence from poem A, and not only but also sentence, method analysis from that poem, any sort of development about that poem, zoom into a word, maybe a U-turn sentence, a structural feature of that poem. Then I would move on, still in the same paragraph, and be like, however, or similarly, poem B, and do the same thing, but maybe slightly less in terms of you're not including the structural feature there, or zoom into the word of that second poem. Then for paragraph 2, I would swap around. So I would start with poem B. I would do my comparative point for the second paragraph, then to analyze poem B in detail, introduce poem A again, but then speak about that in not as much detail as I did the first time. So I would take out the zoom in and the structural feature. So that way you've spoken about both poems equally, but in 2 separate paragraphs. Do a short thesis and a short conclusion as well. Now, unseen poetry, I actually think that's very, very simple, but I think a lot of people just panic about it because it's something that they don't usually practice. And unseen poetry, all it is practice. What you do as soon as you see the poem in front of you, because it should be a poem that you've never seen before, read the title carefully, understand what the question is asking, think about what's the topic, what's the emotional tone, what's the relationship like maybe in the poem. Track the emotional shift of the poem. Most poems change emotionally, so you can talk about that poem in detail and analyse how the emotions change throughout. Have a short paragraph about the beginning, short paragraph about the middle, short paragraph about the end, and then you're analysing maybe 1 or 2 quotes per paragraph about one poem. Don't overcomplicate it, just analyse methods in the poem and link it back to the question. It's really quite simple. There's not a specific structure for your unseen poetry, but I would suggest just writing it in a similar fashion as you would your Macbeth or Jekyll and Hyde essay. Then for the short 8 marker, you're just doing a comparison of methods. People always forget this and they write one huge paragraph comparing the 2 poems. This is not section B where you're comparing poems. You're literally comparing the methods in 2 poems. So if you spot a metaphor in poem A, you need to try find a metaphor in poem B and compare the use of the metaphors in both of those. Don't overcomplicate that section. Forgot to say my predictions for love and relationship. I think Letters from Yorkshire have never come up. It's not the greatest poem, but you can talk about distance. Or if it just speaks about love, then that's completely fine. I think also When We Two Parted is a good option to come up. Overall though, just understand it's not about memorization, it's about adaptation. Don't just revise to recognize a question, revise so you are able to answer any question. And you'll be great.